New videos every day.
Life, wisdom.
Hi, I'm Dr. Colin Ross. I'm a psychiatrist. I live and work in Dallas. And what I want to talk about today is genes in the brain in the context of mental illness and psychiatry. So there's a lot of talk in psychiatry these days about this is a genetic illness. Your abnormal genes cause abnormal things in your brain, which cause your abnormal symptoms, behavior, and perception. So it's genes to brain to behavior. And it all goes in that direction. And so this is kind of a genetic illness model of what's going on. So for that to be true, what would have to be true? Well, first of all, we would have to have this actually demonstrated and proven. Here's this gene or this set of genes that cause this abnormality in your brain that in turn causes this abnormality in your behavior and your mental state. Well, we don't have that. But there's no reason that it couldn't be true. That in 5 years or 10 years or 20 years or 30 years, we couldn't discover that just in principle until you start to look at the reality of the brain and the genes. So in psychiatry, nobody says, well, there's a hole this big in one side of your brain and that's why you've got a mental health problem. Or, you're totally missing this side of your brain. So it's clear that your genes, it's clear to both doctors anyway, that your genes cause you to have 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 eyes. So your basic physical setup of your body is a genetic blueprint. Nobody in medicine disputes that. And your brain has got 2 halves, and you've got, on this side of your brain, you've got this structure, you've got exactly the same structure on this side of your brain. So the basic physical structure of your brain is pretty much mapped out by your genes. Nobody's disputing that in medicine. But in psychiatry, nobody's saying that mental disorders come from big noticeable holes or lumps or defects that you can just see on an MRI. All the action is at the level of the synapse, the space between different nerve cells in the brain, and the neurotransmitter that goes back and forth, and it is the communication mechanism for one cell talking to another cell to another cell. That's all agreed on in psychiatry. So where the action is in psychiatry, according to the biological psychiatrist, is at the level of the synapse. And we have these genetic illnesses that are causing abnormal things to go on at the synapse level, like too much dopamine or too little serotonin. Well, wait a minute, let's just do some arithmetic. How many genes are there? This is not the exact number, and it shifts around a little based on research, but basically it's accepted in biology that there's about 30,000 genes in your body. And probably maybe about 2/3 of them are involved in brain proteins and brain structure. So there's 30,000 genes. So you could have one gene that controls one thing in your brain, and if that gene's abnormal, your brain's abnormal, and your mental state's abnormal. But everybody recognizes, no, it's more complicated than that. If genes are involved, it's got to be multiple genes. But for a gene problem to cause a synapse problem, you want to know how many genes there are. Okay, there's 30,000. But how many synapses are there in the brain? How many little spaces are there where one nerve communicates with another? And the answer is 100 quadrillion. So we go million, billion, trillion, quadrillion. So a million is 6 zeros, billion is 9, trillion is 12. That's a lot of zeros by the time you get to a quadrillion. And the number here obviously is not exact, but this is kind of the best estimate ballpark now. So there's literally a billion genes, a billion synapses for every gene. So if you had 2, 3, 4, 5 abnormal genes, how do we get from 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 abnormal genes, or even 10 or 20 or 30 to a problem at the synapses? The synapses cannot possibly be controlled by individual genes or even collections of genes, because there's a billion synapses for every gene. So this simple arithmetic proves that what the structure and function and what's going on at the synapse level can't be controlled by some small number of genes. So, and this is where the action is in psychiatry. So the action in psychiatry cannot be controlled in some simple little, here's the diagram way by what's going on in the genes. It's absolutely just arithmetic level impossible. Well, so that's a lot of synapses. If you take a number, just in this ballpark, and you figure you've probably got somewhere in this general ballpark that many synapses on the day you're born, and you just take 9 months of a pregnancy, so that's 40 weeks, times 7 days, times 24 hours, times 60 minutes, times 60 seconds, you can calculate just on your calculator how many seconds there are in a pregnancy. And if we just, so this is just rough calculation. If we assume when you're born, you've got 100 quadrillion synapses, and we assume just an average rate of creating synapses during a pregnancy, it's 10 million synapses per second. That's how fast synapses are created. Now, when you're older, of course, this is going to slow down. Let's say it slows down by 90%, which is pulling it out of nowhere, but 90%, that's a lot of slowdown. Even if the rate your brain creates synapses slows by 90% in adulthood, you're still creating 1 million new synapses every second. And not only are you creating synapses all the time, which means actually growing physical branches of your nerves, you're also pruning off 1 million synapses every second, because otherwise your brain would fill your whole skull. So we know that the brain is constantly building new synapses and trimming off old ones at the rate of, rough ballpark, 1 million or more per second. But there's only 30,000 genes. So what's controlling all of this creation of synapses and pruning off of synapses? It's either completely chaotic and random, or it's responsive to the environment. Those are the only two possibilities. It cannot be controlled by the genes. So when you learn stuff or you experience stuff, your brain is constantly going and building all these new wiring diagrams to take that into account. So the rate at which your brain creates new wiring diagrams is so ultra fast, there's no possibility that in some simple way it's controlled by 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 or 15 genes. And this is my argument for why the whole bad genes cause bad brain, which causes bad mental state, is logically impossible. There may be a few exceptions to that, but in a big majority of cases, it's just impossible that you're this mentally ill robot who's malfunctioning because his brain's malfunctioning, and his brain's malfunctioning because his genes is malfunctioning. It's not scientifically possible. So that's something that you should think about, be aware of, and you should take with a large grain of salt any psychiatrist who's saying, we know that it's a genetic illness, we know that the genes are controlling the brain and the brain is controlling your mental state, and it's just a brain disorder. It just doesn't make scientific, medical, biological sense. So thanks for listening to that.